eve of the Farnborough Airshow. I'm Robert Wall in London, and I'm joined by my colleagues, also in London, in for the Airshow, Rory Jones here, our Middle East airline reporter.
Nice to be here.
Good to see you, Rory. Good to have you in town. And also with us is John Ostrower. John, where are you? John is in, our Boeing reporter, and he's also come across, and I think he's come across on the 787. So I hope you enjoyed that, John. I guess we're going to have three topics for everyone today. We're going to talk about the A330neo and what might be in store there. We're also going to, there you are, John. It's good to see you. Oh, well. John seems to have gone tech, so maybe that 787 experience rubbed off on him. Anyway, so while John gets reconnected here, we're going to be talking about the A330neo and what Airbus may or may not have in store for us during the Farnborough Air Show. We'll talk about the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and its probable or possible no-show at the Air Show. And then we'll also talk a bit about the outlook for airlines. It's been really strong for a while, and now there's some signs that may not be the case. So it looks like John has undertaken some emergency depot maintenance and is back with us. John?
Good of you to join us, John.
Hey, I'm good. Keith, I'm just looking at the copy now. It's so skeletal.
All right.
I am indeed back.
All right.
I think.
Well, all right, John. Well, listen, we've kind of done the intros. Let's just get started with A330neo. You've gotten kind of the first nice scoop of the show, so thanks for that. And tell us what you found out.
Well, the A330neo is a lot more cohesive a concept than we ever could have possibly have imagined. Airbus is moving forward swiftly with touting a 14% improvement in fuel efficiency for the A330neo. How does it get that? Well, it's a combination of aerodynamic improvements and engine technology. Crucially, Airbus, it appears that it has selected Rolls-Royce to power the A330neo, a name that may change, actually. Engine, which is a derivative engine of the same power plant that was developed by Rolls-Royce for Boeing for the 787 Dreamliner. It's essentially the same size. It's a 112-inch fan versus a 97-inch fan for the current Trent 7000. It's not It's not a 10 times larger.
John, I need to cut you off briefly because we actually missed part of your introduction. You were telling us about
my math is
the engine choice. So why don't you walk us through the engine choice again? So we've got the A330 neo possibly coming and the 14% fuel burn improvement. Rolls-Royce, you mentioned, is the power plant provider. Give us a bit more detail there.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Is it coming through all right?
You were having technical problems hearing you, John, actually, I hate to say.
Thanks. Send it to me and to Neil.
But you are? Okay.
Thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and disconnect and go ahead and try and reconnect to the chat. I think that's probably...
All right. Let's do that. Maybe Rory and I will... Okay, Rory, while we try to get John fixed here, let's maybe talk about something else. Talk a bit about... let's talk a bit about the airline situation, particularly in the market. I mean, there's been kind of some interesting developments. While we hadn't flagged this, we weren't going to necessarily talk about it, but since we have some extra time here. Very interesting last week, Mr. Hogan, boss of Etihad, came in and talked a bit about, the opposition in Europe to his airline purchasing spree. Tell us a bit about what the plea was, or the case was, Mr. Hogan made to the Europeans.
Well, James Hogan is a big believer in his own strategy, clearly, that he wants to take stakes in other airlines and through that build economies of scale and cut out costs for all the airlines. And what he's been trying to convince Europe and the regulators in Europe and the other airlines in Europe is that this is a good thing for business, that consolidation, or at least buying of equity stakes, is good in the sense that it saves jobs, it creates economies of scale for all the airlines involved, and essentially provides choice for the consumer, choice in the sense that a consumer can now choose between legacy carriers in Europe and the Gulf carriers who are expanding aggressively into that European market.
Right. Well, let me ask you, do you realistically think that it's going to go anywhere? I mean, I have a hard time believing that there's much appetite in Europe for changing ownership and control rules to ease Etihad's life here. I think, if anything, it'll go the other way, don't you think?
Well, I think Etihad have been pretty clear that they don't want to take they don't want to take majority stakes in these airlines. They want to stick with minority stakes that are within EU regulations or regulations wherever they are in the world. And that what they want to do is they want strong management that can run their own airline, but then in the back end and the front end, they can help sales and marketing together. They can merge their frequent flyer plans, and you can earn and burn on both. And that they can cut out costs through either buying of aircraft, group buying of aircraft, or buying of in-flight entertainment systems, and so that each of these airlines benefits from being in a bigger group and sort of beyond, taking an alliance beyond the sales and marketing, and to go much deeper and try and cut some costs. Now, I think it's going to take some time. This strategy has only been around for two and a half years since Etihad really bought into Air Berlin. So I think we need to let James Hogan give him his time before we're highly critical, essentially.
Can I, before we go back here to our original topic, let me just ask the last question. Do you have the sense that Mr. Hogan is done with his minority stake purchasing spree?
No, not at all. I don't think they're looking at every single airline out there and they're going to buy into every failing airline. But they're definitely. I don't think they're done with this this strategy. I think they see synergies in other parts of the world. I think Europe is where this strategy is being concentrated at the moment. But I think that we might see a minority stake in Africa, for example, or in Asia. So I don't think they're done just yet, but I don't think they're going gung ho with every airline that's on the sales board.
Okay, well, terrific, and it looks like John is back with us. So, John, let's try to go back to the A330neo. Let's hope that Airbus doesn't have the same startup problems that we're on that product that we're having here. So, again, walk us through a bit more about the details of the airplane. Percentage fuel burn improvement you're expecting to see, maybe some other performance enhancement that might be coming. All right. Well, we seem to be slightly cursed here with Mr. Ostrower, so I don't really know what to say, Rory.
Well, how about
we can go to? I mean, obviously, one relevant thing to talk about, if we go back to the airline discussion, is we've got at the same time that Mr. Hogan is kind of making his case here. Our third topic was going to be the profit warnings in Europe. It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that the two airlines that have been squawking the most, Air France and Lufthansa, are the ones that have now had profit warnings. What's the sense in the Middle East? Do you think folks there really are feel like they are partly to blame for the overcapacity that some of these airlines are talking about?
I think the feeling here is one of the European airlines probably need to get their own house in order. I mean, you wrote this week that one of the main reasons for these profit warnings from Air France, KLM, and from Lufthansa in the last few weeks is because they've got over capacity on some routes. So it's almost a strategic decision by those airlines that they've put additional capacity on those routes, but they put additional capacity on those routes at the wrong time. Now, I don't think that you can blame, you can fully blame these profit warnings on the expansion of Gulf Airlines into Europe. I think clearly the expansion of Gulf Airlines into Europe is a threat to European carriers, but they're also they also need to look at how running their own ships. I think is probably what the execs in the Middle East are thinking.
No, absolutely. I mean, and what's interesting, one of the things that's obviously quite interesting is that the European airlines feel a lot of pressure to do more restructuring. And in fact, just today we found out that Iberia will cut some more jobs. I mean, they kind of flagged that was coming. Air France says they're going to have more announcements to come. One thing I thought was really interesting this week about the Lufthansa announcement is this idea that they might team up to provide a kind of low-cost long haul. Yeah, and they might team up with Turkish, which is, of course, trying to emulate Emirates. So I think that's very curious, and I kind of wonder, that makes me bring up kind of the other topic. Long term, do you see really a new, I don't want to use the alliance term, but a partnership really emerging between some of the European networks and the Middle East carriers?
Well, yes, certainly. I think what James Hogan is doing in buying into other airlines isn't wholly unique around the world. There are other airlines that have stakes in other airlines. Air France KLM has a stake in Alitalia, for example, but we know that that's been diluted and reduced recently. But it's not a completely new concept. And sticking with Air France KLM, they've already signed a partnership with Etihad to go beyond alliance, to go beyond code sharing. So they're looking at how they can revenue share as a partnership. That's almost one step beyond. They're not in the same partnership that Etihad has with Air Berlin, but if Etihad does finish this deal with Alitalia, and it's currently got its Air Berlin deal, having a partnership, having a revenue sharing partnership with Air France KLM, sort of joins all those dots together in Europe and creates a much larger network that can feed into Etihad's Abu Dhabi hub.
Yeah, well, and then of course, I mean, you've kind of reported there's been the talks of Qatar and IAG doing something together, even if that may not be imminent. If you listen to IAG,
maybe I should ask you a question, Robert. Given that I know that you know a lot about the A330, sort of tell us what we might expect from Farnborough Airshow in the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of just to briefly recap what John was going to tell us. I mean, basically, Airbus is saying that the 330neo, which they have not yet formally launched, but the 330neo would have 14% fuel burn improvement over the current A330, be powered by a new Rolls-Royce engine, Trent 7000, it's apparently called, and it would carry a few more passengers and also provide a bit more range. So, really, they're trying to probably give this airplane a second lease on life.
But why would you do that over not just creating a brand new spanking new jet that you can go out and market and you can come up with a wonderful name like something perhaps like Dreamliner or something Dreamliner?
Well, or A350-800, you might say, right?
There you go, yeah.
No, but I mean, I think the situation, there's a couple of factors at work here. One, the A330 has been selling well, it's been popular, and it's actually quite key to Airbus's profits. And it's running out of order backlog. So they either have to say goodbye to that stream of money, or they have to do something, and this would be the doing something. And the other thing, of course, is that the 330 has a good reputation, right? It's become quite popular. It's very reliable, and Airbus will try to capitalize on that. So I think that's really what's going on.
What about the fact that in the past few years we've seen the launch of the 787 had some difficulties, and so do you think that there's some trepidation among airlines that they don't necessarily want to go in for a completely new jet?
I think that's definitely the case. I'm not sure that's that much of a factor in this particular situation, actually. because in a way the 350-900 development has been going extremely smoothly, so you wouldn't think that's necessarily so much of a concern. But I do think your general observation that there are airlines increasingly risk averse about being the first to take a jet. I do think that's definitely the case. I think you're right there. And hold on, looks like John might be back with us. John.
I am here indeed. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay, no, that's quite all right. Well, John, just to quickly fill you in. So we've kind of gone through, explained what the 330 Neo will look like, what the performance improvements are, and why Airbus might do it. Perhaps from your perspective, I mean, you're the Boeing watcher. How do you think Seattle is looking at this?
Well, certainly they take a dim view of it. Any big shift in the Airbus wide-body strategy is an opportunity for Boeing to tout the fact that theirs has been set for quite some time now, and certainly they're going to be pushing a rather negative view of the 330, looking back at the original 350 design as sort of evidence that it didn't work the first time. So certainly what we're going to see is a very strong pushback from Boeing on virtually all counts. Certainly is a warmed over product, but the important thing to remember is that the industry has changed considerably from 2006 till now. We've gone through a collective financial crisis, but there's also been a very significant wave of risk aversion within the industry as far as new products and the cost to introduce them. So certainly Airbus is counting on that really riding that wave for an A330 that takes advantage of the 99.4% reliability they tout with it, but also an engine technology that's actually been borne out on the 787 already with the Trent 7000 and the improvements that they're hoping to get there. So what we're really seeing is Airbus advancing ultimately a product cost innovation rather than a performance innovation for this new product. So it really is faster, better, cheaper, rather than higher, faster, farther, which has really historically been Boeing's MO as far as product development. So it's going to be a really interesting contrast in specifically watching an evolved product, the A330, go head to head with the 787.
John, let me ask you something. I mean, Airbus has talked about potential market for this airplane of over 1,000 sales, which, if that's true, would probably take it through the next decade. And Steve Vahazi has kind of put that number out there too. Do you think that's realistic, or is that overly ambitious?
Well, it's funny. The market expectations for jetliners have shifted so significantly from the days when the 777 was being launched, when the A330 originally showed up. The original expectation was sales for a wide-body aircraft in the early 90s, for example, was 144 orders at the time of first delivery for the 777. So markets being what they are, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that's evolved and whether or not an expectation of a market that large really makes sense ultimately. I think the question is, when you look at Boeing and Airbus each having to fill out a bridge to their next generation products, obviously Boeing with the 777X and now Airbus on the A330 Neo, that there really is a dwindling or softening demand in the face of these new products, which are going to ultimately move the bar on performance. So the question really is whether or not the market, not necessarily even for the newest products, materializes, because certainly the industry has shown itself to really want a lot of improvement in fuel burn, but also how each manufacturer is going to deliver on building a production bridge to both products, and then ultimately continue sustaining that demand into 330 Neo and 777X.
Who's likely to be the buyers, John, for the 330 Neo? I mean, who's gonna make up that 1,000 orders?
Well, there really are two schools of thought about that. So on the one hand, you've got opportunistic buyers like Delta Airlines, which is really Richard Anderson just a few weeks ago at the Aero Club in Washington D.C. pretty much was ready to launch the airplane right there in the middle of lunch, and said, I'll make the announcement for John Leahy right now. And so it's not going to be surprising if Delta ends up committing to the 330 Neo as one of its launch customers. So certainly an opportunistic buyer there. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got an AirAsia, which actually kicked off the discussion of the A330 Neo back at the Paris Air Show in 2011, when Tom Enders, quite almost in a tongue-in-cheek way, said that Tony Fernandez, who the CEO of AirAsia, was pushing Airbus even back then for a re-engined A330. So you see a low-cost carrier wanting to have low capital cost to acquire aircraft, and then you've got a established legacy carrier taking the opportunity to deliver on a much more conservative fleet plan. The question is whether or not, and the second part of that is whether or not Airbus will be able to get this airplane with current owners of the A330. Delta and AirAsia are seemingly yes in that category, but as far as the what does a 14% fuel burn improvement do to the value of an existing A330, and whether or not that's going to significantly hurt those aircraft. Ultimately, that same criticism was leveled at the A320 Neo before it was launched as well. So really the question is whether or not we see a different behavior with wide bodies, or the same thing on the Neo.
I mean, that's. Let me just chime in on that, since you mentioned the Neo situation. I mean, that's clearly what's driving this thinking. They had such success with the 320 Neo. They seem to have kind of gotten the Neo bug, and I think really this decision, right, and the success of this program will be quite critical for not just for Airbus airplane maker, but also for the folks in for the group, because Tom Enders has repeatedly cited the Neo concept as the way Airbus will become more profitable. Don't keep inventing new things. Try to make money with the stuff you have. And if 330 Neo is a success, then I think that corporate strategy will just be rolled out even stronger. And if it's not, then it'll be very interesting, because I think there'll have to be a real rethink down in Toulouse about how does that work going forward.
But that could that therefore then mean we might see an A380 Neo, and these are our friends over at Emirates. I know that Tim Clark would happily see an A380 Neo.
I think jury's out, and I think in a way this 330 Neo just puts something else on both Rolls' plates and Airbus's plates. So can they do another program? Yeah, potentially, but I think Airbus would want to be convinced that it's not just a Tim Clark airplane, but at least there's someone else, and hard to imagine who that might be right now.
Just a bit of a potential trolling going on by Rolls-Royce. I don't think it should escape our note that the competing engine on the A380 is the GP7000, and now we've got the Trent 7000 coming for the A330, and it should not be forgotten that Boeing only committed to the 747-8 once it was clear that the engine for the 787 could be adapted. So now we've got an engine for the A330, and we'll see if it finds its way to the A380 as potential sole source there. So certainly, I guess the 2 or 3 chapters from now we'll be writing about what happens to Engine Alliance and the fight under the wing of the A380, and whether or not there is a market for a re-engined Super Jumbo.
Yeah, exactly. So, but let's maybe wrap it up there. We've talked about the airline situation, so let's spend a few minutes on the killing business, as I like to call it. John, I invited you to join me at the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford this year to go see the F-35, and then we got to spend lots of time with Lockheed, and we got to spend quite a bit of time also with the General Bogdan, who runs the program, but no jets, so stuck in the U.S. What do you make of the situation?
Well, certainly there's been huge expectations for the F-35 as the program has begun to find, or had begun to find, a more of a steady rhythm. as far as flying and testing. And Lockheed, put on a brave face yesterday, even in the face of the fact that they didn't have their flagship there to show off. Certainly, General Bogdan was his usual candid self about the situation, but really, Lockheed is moving forward on with F-35 development, along with its international partners and the U.S. government just as swiftly as ever. So certainly, even in the face of a grounding, there's if there was any kind of shaken confidence, we didn't see it yesterday.
Well, Rory, I mean, you're a bit of an outside observer on this, but of course, the UAE is actually a potential buyer down the road.
It's in the market for some fighters, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Your guys have the money.
Our part of the world, the Middle East, certainly has the money, and that, if anyone who reads the news, they'll be sure to see that there's some conflict in the region as well, and there's some tension. I mean, a lot of that tension, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Iran, has perhaps eased in the last few months. But I think there's definitely a market out in the Middle East. The problem is these deals take a long time to push through. We were talking about the Rafale for years in the UAE, and then the Eurofighter as well is in that. So it's a slow burner. I don't think I think these deals take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a couple. Obviously, a couple of countries there in the region that are still on the market. I mean, the Saudis have bought heavily, but the Qatar fighter decision is still pending, and and like you said, the UAE. Well, we've got to kind of wait and see what's going to happen there. I mean, I think the one thing really interesting on kind of the F-35's no-show is it's just delaying the British decision to buy. I mean, on the one hand, General Bogdan said he needs those foreign countries to stay committed to the program, because one of the ways they get the cost down is, of course, getting the volume up. And the UK is one of the countries that's the purchase keeps pending, and now we were supposed to get it here basically around this time, and now with the grounding, of course, the optics aren't great, and I think we have to write it off. Although I guess the one thing John, you were there as well. It's kind of interesting that General Bogdan didn't quite rule out that the plane might not still show up. So that was, I guess, a bit of a tease for us.
Well, evergreen expectations. It's. I think that we're going to be holding our breath till just about the last minute to see if those F-35s make the transatlantic crossing, and if they do, it's certainly going to be a bit of a Hail Mary pass for the airplane. But I think there's when it comes to aerospace and high expectations, that Hail Marys are quite infrequent.
Well, and I mean, the one thing we know, the Lockheed's in good company, right? They're not the only company not to have a no-show at Farnborough. Bombardier, of course, will not have the C-Series here either, because really we don't really know how that situation has developed much since they had their on-the-ground engine problems back a few months ago now. John, how do you see that?
Well, it's funny that I think every air show, whenever there's a new airplane, the sexiest airplane out there, there's always that expectation that there's going to be some kind of stunt. Actually, in the days leading up to I guess at that point it was the Paris Air Show in 2009. Boeing, there was some murmurs that Boeing was going to try and fly the 787 right after its first flight over to the show. Certainly, Airbus has managed to succeed with that last year with the 350 just on one of its early flights. Did it fly by the show, but again, I think what all of this underscores is from an engine perspective is that if you end up in a situation where you can't actually get off the ground, it makes it considerably harder to show up at an air show, and that does not bode well for whoever makes that engine, or whoever finds themselves responsible or that standing on the ground. So certainly, we've seen the same thing with C Series as well, which has been grounded since last month because of their own engine issues with the geared turbofan. So certainly, it does present a problem for and a bit of a hit to the momentum that Pratt had enjoyed up until now.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I guess we'll leave it at that. Well, we'll dispense with making order predictions, except that I'll make one. There'll be some, and otherwise, Rory, thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
And John, good that we finally got you properly joined us. So anyway, and it's good to have you over here in London for the air show. And with that, thanks everyone, and please follow us on the Wall Street Journal's Farnborough stream. You'll see all our tweets, our stories, and many more things. So enjoy.